The woman's voice was a shriek wrapped in condescension, a sound that scraped against the otherwise perfect tranquility of the morning. It was a sound that did not belong here, among the gentle whisper of wind through pine needles and the quiet, constant burble of the spring. I am not asking you, Mr. Sterling. I am telling you. This pit is a violation of Covenant Section 7, Paragraph B, Subsection 4. It is an unauthorized modification of community common ground and a clear safety hazard. I kept my posture relaxed, hands resting loosely on my hips. My gaze shifted from the source of the noise, a woman whose floral print pantsuit seemed to be at war with nature itself, to the object of her fury. It wasn't a pit, it was a spring, a natural artesian wellspring that bubbled clean, cold water out of the earth. It was the heart of my property. It was the reason I bought this land. Her name was Brenda McGinnis, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. Her face was a pinched knot of indignation, her makeup a brave but failing levee against the tide of her advancing years. She stood, arms akimbo, on the edge of my property line, a line she seemed to believe was a mere suggestion. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the clean air cool my lungs. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm and even, a stark contrast to her shrill pronouncements. "We've been over this. First, this is not community common ground. This is my property, Parcel B, as clearly delineated on the county plat maps, which I have sent to you on 3 separate occasions." She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture so sharp it threatened to dislodge one of her lacquered curls. "Details, legal mumbo-jumbo. I am the president of this community, and I am responsible for its safety and aesthetic uniformity." I continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Second, it is not an unauthorized modification. It's a natural geological feature. It was here long before this housing development was a gleam in a developer's eye. Modifying it would require significant excavation and would likely, according to the hydrogeologist I consulted, destabilize the water table for the entire area." I gave her a pointed look. "Including the one that feeds the decorative pond at the front entrance you're so proud of." This, I knew, was an expert rebuttal. It was factual, precise, and based on professional consultation. For a normal person, it would have been the end of the discussion. For Brenda, it was merely the opening salvo of a war she was determined to wage. She snorted, a sound like a small, angry pig. "More excuses. I don't care about your hydrogeologists. I have the authority of the HOA board behind me. You will fill this hazard in, cap it, and plant grass over it. If you do not comply within 14 days, we will hire a contractor to do it for you, and you will be billed for the expense. Furthermore, you will be fined $100 a day for non-compliance. Is that clear?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and noxious. Fines, liens, forced entry onto my land. It was the classic playbook of the petty tyrant, a person given a thimbleful of authority who believes they command an ocean. I had seen her ilk before, in different contexts, in different uniforms. The tactics were always the same. I didn't get angry. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. It clouds judgment. Instead, a familiar, cold calm washed over me. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in the 3 years since I'd retired. It was the feeling of a mission brief, the quiet hum of a complex problem presented, the internal click of systems coming online. She thought this was a neighborhood dispute. She thought she was dealing with a retired old man who just wanted to be left alone. She was right about the second part. She was catastrophically wrong about the first. I am a retired colonel from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. For 35 years, my job was to build, to manage, and, when necessary, to dismantle complex systems under extreme pressure. I've built bridges under fire and designed infrastructure for entire cities. I've navigated bureaucratic minefields that would make an HOA covenant look like a child's coloring book. Brenda McGinnis had just, with all the strategic foresight of a lemming, declared war on a man who had forgotten more about rules, regulations, and strategic planning than she would ever know. My peaceful retirement was over. The mission had been assigned, and I do not fail my missions. Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in. If you've ever had a run-in with a power-tripping HOA board or a neighborhood tyrant who thinks their opinion is law, you're going to want to hear this one. This story is for anyone who's ever been told what they can and can't do on their own property by someone with a little bit of power and a whole lot of nerve. If that sounds familiar, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. It really helps the channel out. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what your own a nightmare story is. It's always good to know you're not alone in the trenches. Now let me tell you how this all started. It wasn't with a shriek, but with a dream. After 3.5 decades in the Corps, I was done. Done with the deployments, done with the bureaucracy, done with waking up in a different time zone every 6 months. I loved my career, don't get me wrong. It gave me purpose, discipline, and a skill set that is, shall we say, uniquely robust. But the price was a life lived out of a duffel bag. My late wife, Sarah, had always dreamed of a place with a garden. A real one, not just a few sad-looking pots on a balcony in government housing. After she passed, that dream became my anchor. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet. I wanted a piece of the world I could call my own. A sanctuary where the only orders I had to follow were the changing of the seasons. I spent a year searching. I wasn't looking for a house. I was looking for land. The house was secondary, a structure to be inhabited. The land was the living entity I wanted to be a part of. I finally found it on the edge of a development called Oak Haven Estates. It was a 5-acre plot, but it was unique. The developer had originally planned for the whole area to be part of the subdivision, but a quirk in the county zoning from decades prior had left a 1-acre parcel at the very back of Lot 22 legally separate. It was unincorporated county land, grandfathered in with its own deed and tax ID. The main house and the front 4 acres were technically within the Oak Haven HOA, but that last acre, the one that sloped down into a beautiful stand of old-growth woods, was not. And on that 1 acre, nestled among moss-covered rocks, was the spring. The moment I saw it, I knew. It wasn't large, just a gentle, persistent upwelling of water so clear you could see every pebble and grain of sand on the bottom. It created a small, meandering brook that trickled down into the woods. It was the lifeblood of that little patch of forest. To me, it wasn't just water, it was the soul of the place. I was a man whose life had been about controlling and directing nature for human purposes. Now, all I wanted was to sit beside a piece of it and just let it be. Being the man I am, I did my due diligence. I spent 2 weeks at the county records office. I hired a title lawyer to review the deeds, the surveys, and the HOA's own founding documents. The conclusion was ironclad. The house was in the HOA, but the back acre with the spring was not. The HOA's authority ended at a line of survey markers that were still, thankfully, visible. I bought the property. For the first 2 years, it was bliss. I paid my HOA dues on time, kept the front yard immaculate, and was a model, if reclusive, resident. Most of my time was spent on that back acre. I cleared a small path down to the spring. I built a simple wooden bench where I'd sit and drink my morning coffee. I watched deer drink from the brook and listened to the chorus of frogs in the evening. Then came the project. Sarah had loved orchids. She'd tried to grow them everywhere we lived, with varying degrees of success. I decided to build a greenhouse. Not just any greenhouse, but one designed specifically for orchids. And the spring was the key. My plan was to build a beautiful, Victorian-style glass and steel greenhouse directly over the spring. The natural humidity and constant cool water source would create the perfect microclimate. It would be my monument to her, my retirement project, my sanctuary within a sanctuary. I'm an engineer. I don't eyeball things. I spent 6 months on the design. I commissioned architectural plans. I filed for and received all the necessary county permits for construction on my unincorporated parcel. I hired a reputable local company, and for another 6 months, I supervised the construction. The result was, if I do say so myself, a masterpiece. A jewel box of glass and black steel sitting serenely in the woods. The quiet burble of the spring, a constant, gentle hum inside. It was about a month after the greenhouse was completed that I first met Brenda McGinnis. She wasn't shrieking then. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was inside, misting a new cattleya orchid, when I saw her marching down my driveway. She had 2 other people with her, a man and a woman who looked like they were being held hostage by her sheer force of will. I met them on the patio. She introduced herself as the HOA president and her 2 companions as board members, Bob and Shirley. They had the vacant, nodding expressions of people who had long ago surrendered their spines. "We've been receiving complaints," she'd said, her eyes already scanning past me, trying to get a look at the new structure. "About an unapproved outbuilding." "It's a greenhouse," I said politely, "and it's on the part of my property not subject to the HOA covenants." "We'll be the judge of that," she'd sniffed. That was the beginning. What followed was a slow, methodical escalation. First, it was polite-ish letters asking for copies of my building permits. I provided them. Then it was letters demanding to see the architectural plans. I politely declined, citing they were my private property. Then came the first official violation notice, which led to that confrontation by the spring itself. She had pivoted from the greenhouse to the spring it was built on, a new angle of attack. After she stormed off that morning, leaving her threats echoing in the air, I went inside. I made a pot of coffee, sat down at my large oak desk, and stared out the window at the greenhouse. The sun glinted off the glass panes. It looked so peaceful, an island of tranquility under siege. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel rage. I felt activated. My quiet life had been breached. The objective was clear: defend the sanctuary. The enemy was defined: Brenda McGinnis and the overreaching HOA board. The rules of engagement needed to be established. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to an office supply store. A week later, the first official salvo arrived. It wasn't hand-delivered with a shriek this time. It came via the mail carrier, a thick, cream-colored envelope that felt ostentatiously heavy. The return address was embossed: Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, Office of the President. The sheer pretension of it was almost comical. Inside, printed on matching heavy cardstock, was a formal violation notice. It cited 3 separate, vaguely worded bylaws concerning unapproved land modifications, unmitigated natural hazards, and structures not in aesthetic harmony with the community. The letter stated I was being fined an initial $500, plus the previously threatened $100 per day until the violation, the spring, was remediated. The total at the bottom was already a ludicrous figure. It was signed in a large, looping, arrogant script: Brenda McGinnis, President. I read it twice. I noted the passive-aggressive phrasing, the deliberate misinterpretation of the bylaws, the complete disregard for the documented property lines. It was a declaration of total war, written on fancy paper. Instead of my blood pressure rising, it dropped. The mission parameters were now codified. The enemy had committed their attack to paper. Amateurs. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and went into my study. This was where the real work began. At the office supply store, I hadn't just bought paper and pens. I had purchased a heavy-duty 4-inch D-ring binder in stark military black. I'd bought a ream of reinforced paper, a high-quality 3-hole punch, a label maker, and a full set of alphabetized and numbered tabs. With the precision of a field surgeon preparing his instruments, I laid everything out on my desk. I took the cream-colored letter from Brenda and, using a ruler to ensure a perfect crease, folded it neatly. Then I placed it in the 3-hole punch. The ker-chunk of the punch slicing through the heavy cardstock was deeply, profoundly satisfying. I opened the binder. Click. I placed the violation notice inside. On the spine of the binder, I affixed a freshly printed label. It read, Operation Serenity Shield. This was no longer a spat with a neighbor. This was an operation. And every operation needs a command center, a plan, and meticulous documentation. That binder was my field headquarters. Every piece of correspondence, every photograph, every map, every receipt would be logged, cataloged, and filed. Brenda was fighting with emotion and bluster. I would fight with data. My first official act in Operation Serenity Shield was to draft a response. I didn't use emotional language. I didn't threaten or insult. I composed a letter that was a model of polite, firm, factual rebuttal. The letter began by acknowledging receipt of her correspondence, referencing it by date. It then, point by point, dismantled her claims. Point 1. Jurisdiction. I reiterated calmly that the location of the spring, Parcel 7B, County Tax ID number 734-B1-9, was not and has never been part of the Oak Haven Estates HOA as per the founding charter of the association, Article 2, Section 1, which defines the geographic boundaries. I included a freshly printed, high-resolution copy of the official county plat map with my property lines highlighted in yellow and the spring's location marked with a neat red X. Point 2. The nature of the violation. I corrected her terminology. The spring was not a land modification, but a pre-existing geological feature. To support this, I included a copy of the initial geological survey report conducted for the developer in the 1990s, which I had procured from the county planning office. The report specifically mentioned the artesian wellspring located on the adjacent, unincorporated parcel. Point 3. The fines. I stated, simply and without embellishment, that as the HOA has no jurisdiction over the property in question, it therefore has no authority to levy fines or penalties related to it. I respectfully informed her that I would not be paying the fine and considered the matter closed. The entire letter was drafted in a formal, almost sterile tone. It was the kind of report I would have submitted to a commanding general. It was unimpeachable. I printed 2 copies. One was 3-hole punched and placed in Operation Serenity Shield behind tab 1, Correspondence Outgoing. The other was sealed in a business envelope. The next morning, I drove to the post office. I didn't just drop it in a mailbox. I sent it via certified mail, with return receipt requested. This was a critical step. It created a legal record that the letter was sent, and more importantly, that it was received and signed for. The little green card would be her signature on a document proving she had been made aware of the facts. It would come back to me in the mail, and it too would be punched and filed in the binder. I expected this to be the end of it. I had presented incontrovertible evidence. I had been polite but firm. A rational person would review the facts, consult their own documents, and quietly retreat, perhaps with a grudging respect for my thoroughness. Brenda McGinnis, I was learning, was not a rational person. The green return receipt card came back a few days later, bearing Brenda's flamboyant signature. I punched it and filed it. Checkmate, I thought. I was wrong. It wasn't checkmate. It was merely my opening move, which she had completely failed to understand. About a week later, a second cream-colored envelope arrived. This one was thicker. Inside was a letter even more strident than the first. She flatly rejected my so-called evidence. The plat map, she claimed, was irrelevant. The geological survey was ancient history. She accused me of willful and flagrant disregard for community standards. And then came the escalation. The fine had not been rescinded. In fact, due to my failure to comply, the daily penalties had been accruing. The new total she was demanding was now well into the thousands, and she added a new threat. If payment was not received within 10 days, the HOA's legal counsel would be instructed to place a lien on my property. I read the letter, and a slow smile spread across my face. This was a gift, a beautiful, legally calamitous gift. Placing a lien on a property is a serious legal action. Attempting to place a lien for a non-existent debt on property over which you have no jurisdiction was not just wrong, it was stepping onto a legal landmine. She had documented her intent to commit an illegal act and mailed it to me. Kerchunk. The letter joined its predecessor in the binder. Operation Serenity Shield was growing heavier. It was time to move to the next phase of the operation, deep reconnaissance and the engagement of higher authorities. My peaceful walks around the neighborhood were about to become intelligence-gathering missions. The binder sat on my desk, a silent black monolith of growing truth. My counteroffensive was no longer just about defending my own property. Brenda's letter, with its illegal threat of a lien, had changed the operational parameters. She wasn't just a nuisance, she was a danger. Her ignorance of the law was so profound that she was a liability to the entire community she claimed to lead. My mission evolved. It was no longer just about defense, it was about liberation. I dedicated the next 2 weeks to research. My study, once a place of quiet reading and contemplation, became a strategic operations center. I wasn't just a retired engineer anymore. I was an intelligence analyst. I dove into the labyrinth of state and county law. I spent hours on the phone with clerks at various government offices, using the same polite, persistent tone I once used to secure logistical support in hostile territories. My first target was water rights. In my state, as in many, water is a jealously guarded resource. The laws governing it are old, complex, and powerful. I spent 3 days reading case law and statutes, cross-referencing them with environmental regulations. And then I found it, the legal smoking gun, a statute I mentally nicknamed the Aquifer Protection Act of 1978. The act was designed to protect natural water sources from unregulated interference. It stated, in breathtakingly clear language, that any action to cap, block, divert, or otherwise impede the flow of a natural spring or artesian well without a comprehensive environmental impact study and a permit from the State Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, was a Class C misdemeanor, subject to severe fines levied not against an association, but against the individuals authorizing the action. Furthermore, if the spring was a source for a natural waterway, as mine was, the penalties were even steeper, falling under federal Clean Water Act protections. Brenda's demand that I fill in this hazard wasn't just an overreach of HOA authority, it was a demand that I commit a crime. And her threat to hire a contractor to do it meant she was planning to conspire to commit that crime. I printed out the entirety of the act. I highlighted the relevant sections in yellow. I used a red pen to underline the specific penalties. Kerchunk. It went into the binder under a new tab labeled Legal Precedents. My next step was to engage a higher authority. I called the regional office of the Department of Environmental Protection. I got a junior agent on the phone, a young man who sounded bored and overworked. I calmly explained the situation. A homeowners association was demanding, under threat of penalty, that I illegally cap a natural spring that fed a local waterway. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What? The agent asked, his boredom instantly replaced by sharp attention. I repeated the facts, this time referencing the Aquifer Protection Act by its official statute number. I could hear the furious clicking of a keyboard in the background. "Sir, can you hold one moment?" I was put on hold. When he came back on the line, his voice had a new tone of respect. "Sir, I have my supervisor, Mr. Harris, on the line with me. Could you please repeat your story for him?" I did. Mr. Harris was older, his voice a gravelly baritone that radiated authority. He listened without interruption until I was finished. "Colonel Sterling," he said, his use of my title telling me he'd likely look me up during the hold. "Let me be unequivocal. What your HOA president is demanding is illegal, profoundly so. If you were to comply, you would be in violation of state law. If she were to hire someone to do it, she and the contractor would be liable for criminal charges and civil penalties that would make her HOA fines look like pocket change." He continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Frankly, I am appalled at the ignorance and arrogance of this. We fight a constant battle against illegal dumping and industrial pollution. The last thing we need is a homeowners association trying to destroy a protected water source out of sheer pettiness." He took my name, my address, and Brenda's name. He gave me a case file number. "The DEP is officially opening a file on this matter," he said. "We will be sending a formal letter of warning to Ms. McGinnis and the Oak Haven HOA, advising them to cease and desist all efforts to interfere with this spring. That letter will make the legal consequences crystal clear. You, sir, have done everything right. Do not, under any circumstances, touch that spring." I thanked him, wrote down the case number, and hung up. I created a new page in the binder, a call log. I documented the date, time, the names of the agents I spoke with, and the case number they provided. This was no longer just my word against Brenda's. I now had the backing of a state-level government agency. The final part of this phase was building a resistance. I knew I couldn't be Brenda's only victim. Tyrants like her require a steady supply of subjects to torment. I started taking long, slow walks through Oak Haven Estates in the late afternoon, when people were getting home from work or tending their yards. I struck up a conversation with a man named Tom Miller, who was glumly removing a small, cheerful-looking garden gnome from his flower bed. "HOA?" I asked gently. He sighed. "Yeah, third notice. Apparently, mythological creatures are not on the approved list of lawn ornaments. Brenda's latest crusade." I listened as he told me about the constant, nitpicking harassment. His trash cans were an inch too far from the curb. His daughter's basketball hoop had to be taken down every single night. He'd been fined because his garden hose wasn't coiled in a perfectly circular fashion. He and his wife were exhausted, beaten down by the sheer pettiness of it all. A few houses down, I spoke with an elderly widow, Mrs. Gable. Her crime? She had 3 bird feeders instead of the approved one. Brenda had sent her a nasty letter accusing her of attracting vermin and threatening fines if she didn't remove the excess feeders. The woman was near tears. The birds were her main source of joy and companionship. I listened to their stories. I expressed my sympathy. And then I told them a little of my own story. I didn't reveal the full scope of Operation Serenity Shield, but I let them know they weren't alone. I told them I was also having issues with Brenda's overreach and that I was documenting everything. "Could you do me a favor?" I asked each of them. "Could you make me a copy of the violation letters you've received? For my records." Fear is a powerful demotivator. They were hesitant at first, afraid of retribution. But my calm, confident demeanor seemed to reassure them. I wasn't asking them to fight, only to provide information. The next day, both Tom Miller and Mrs. Gable slipped envelopes into my mailbox. Inside were copies of the absurd, insulting letters they'd received from Brenda. Kerchunk, kerchunk. They went into the binder under a new tab labeled Collateral Grievances. The file was no longer just about a spring, it was about a pattern of abuse. Operation Serenity Shield was becoming a class action lawsuit in binder form. The reconnaissance phase was complete. I had my legal ammunition, I had a higher authority on my side, and I had the beginnings of an alliance. It was time to bring in the heavy artillery. With the binder now weighing a solid 5 pounds, it was time to escalate my counteroffensive. Amateurs go to war with what they have. Professionals go to war with overwhelming force. My next step was to retain legal firepower, but I wasn't going to just pick a name out of the phone book. I needed a specific type of lawyer, someone who understood the mission, appreciated the strategy, and wouldn't be intimidated by petty tyrants. I needed a fellow warrior. I called Marcus Thorne. Marcus and I went way back. We'd served together in Iraq. While I was building bridges in forward operating bases, he was a major in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the Army's legal arm. He was sharp, utterly ruthless in a courtroom, and had a deep appreciation for meticulous preparation. After retiring, he'd opened a private practice specializing in property and contract law. He was exactly the cruise missile I needed for this operation. I scheduled a meeting at his downtown office. I didn't walk in empty-handed. I carried the binder. Marcus greeted me with a firm handshake and a grin. "Jack, you old dog, what trouble have you gotten yourself into? Last I heard you were living the quiet life." "The quiet life is under siege, Marcus," I said, my tone serious. "I have a situation that requires your specific expertise." He gestured to a chair in front of his large mahogany desk. "Lay it on me." Instead of speaking, I placed the binder on his desk. I didn't just set it down, I placed it with purpose. It landed with a solid, definitive thud that echoed slightly in the quiet, wood-paneled office. Marcus stared at the binder. He took in the stark black cover, the professionally printed label, Operation Serenity Shield. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. He leaned back in his leather chair, looking from the binder to me and back again. "Jack," he said, a note of pure delight in his voice, "you haven't changed a bit. You field-prepped opposition research." "Open it," I said. For the next hour, he went through it, page by page. He was silent at first, his expression one of professional concentration. He read Brenda's increasingly unhinged letters. He examined the certified mail receipts. He studied the high-resolution plat maps. When he got to the section with the Aquifer Protection Act, he let out a low whistle. When he read my call log with the DEP and saw the state-issued case number, he actually laughed out loud. "My God, Jack," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "This isn't a case file, it's a kill box. You've built a perfect, inescapable legal kill box." He flipped to the section with the collateral grievances from my neighbors. "And you've got supporting witnesses and evidence of a pattern of harassment. This is a prosecutor's dream." He finally closed the binder, tapping his fingers on the cover. "So, what's the objective?" he asked, his tone shifting from amused to all business. "First, defense," I said. "I want an injunction, a temporary restraining order to prevent her and the HOA from setting foot on my property or attempting to place that illegal lien. Second, offense. I want to neutralize the threat, permanently." Marcus's grin returned. "Neutralize. I love it. Jack, with this," he patted the binder, "we can do more than neutralize her. We can dismantle her. We can have her removed from the board for malfeasance, sue her personally for harassment, and potentially even trigger a criminal investigation if that DEP warning doesn't get through to her." He agreed to take the case on the spot, practically salivating at the prospect. He said he'd have the paperwork for the restraining order filed by the end of the day. His final piece of advice was crucial. "Jack, she's going to make a mistake. People like this always do. They get so wrapped up in their own perceived power that they can't stop themselves from overplaying their hand. Be ready to document it when it happens." He was more right than he knew. Brenda's critical error came 3 days later. The DEP's official cease and desist letter had arrived at her house, sent via courier. I know because I saw the truck. I imagine that a letter from a state environmental agency warning of criminal charges would cause a rational person to pause, reflect, and perhaps seek legal counsel. Brenda, however, saw it as a challenge to her authority. The letter didn't cow her, it enraged her. It pushed her over the edge from petty tyranny into outright illegal action. The next morning, at the ungodly hour of 6:30 a.m., I was awoken by the sound of a heavy truck rumbling down the street. It was a large flatbed, and on it was a piece of equipment I knew all too well, a mini excavator. It was followed by a work truck from a local company called Dolan's Demolition and Excavation. They didn't park on the street. They pulled right up over the curb and onto the manicured lawn of my front yard, the part of my property that was, ironically, subject to HOA rules about tire marks on the grass. Two men in hard hats and work vests got out and began to unload the excavator. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "They're there, aren't they? How did you know?" She called my office yesterday, screaming at my paralegal after she got the DEP letter and our notice of intent to file a TRO. Said she was taking matters into her own hands. The judge signed the emergency injunction 10 minutes ago. It's already been faxed to the county sheriff, but you are now officially authorized to serve it yourself. A copy is in your email. Print it. Go stop them, Jack. And for God's sake, record everything. I was already dressed. I printed the injunction. I grabbed my phone and the laminated copy of the county plat map from the binder. I walked out my front door, my heart beating a calm, steady rhythm. The operation was now live. I confronted the two workers not with anger, but with quiet authority. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice steady. My phone was held up, clearly recording. "Can I help you?" The larger of the two, presumably the foreman, grunted. "We're here on behalf of the Oak Haven HOA. Got a work order to fill in a spring-fed hole in the back." "I see," I said calmly. "Were you aware that the area you're about to work on is private property, not part of the HOA?" He shrugged. "Don't know, don't care. We just do the job we're paid for." "I understand," I said, "but I feel it's my duty to inform you of a few things before you unload that machine. First, you are currently trespassing. This is my property." I held up the plat map. "Second, the work you have been hired to perform is illegal under state law, specifically the Aquifer Protection Act. Third, and most immediately, I have here a legally binding emergency injunction signed by Judge Eleanor Vance this morning." I handed him the printed copy of the temporary restraining order. He took it, looking at it with confusion. "What this document means," I explained, as if to a child, "is that you, your company, and the HOA are legally forbidden from performing any work, setting foot on my property, or harassing me in any way. If you unload that excavator, you and your boss will be in contempt of court, which can carry jail time. Your company will also be named in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for damages, trespassing, and conspiracy to commit an illegal act, all of which is being documented." I gestured with my phone. The foreman's bravado evaporated. He read the legal jargon on the injunction, his eyes widening as he saw the judge's signature and the official court seal. He looked at the excavator, then at me, then at my phone. He pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Yeah, Mr. Dolan. Yeah, it's me. We're at that Oak Haven job. Yeah, well, the guy's here. No, he's got some kind of court order. Says we'll be arrested. Yeah, a judge's signature and everything. What? No, I'm not kidding. He's recording me right now." There was a long pause. "Okay, got it." He hung up the phone, his face pale. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "Pack it up," he mumbled to his partner. "We're leaving." They loaded the excavator back onto the flatbed without another word. As they drove away, leaving muddy tracks on my lawn, Brenda's car, a white luxury SUV, came screeching around the corner. She saw the demolition truck leaving and me standing there, victorious, on my porch. She slammed on her brakes and threw the door open, her face a mask of pure fury. But before she could even get a word out, a county sheriff's patrol car pulled up silently behind her. A deputy stepped out, holding his own copy of the injunction. "Ma'am," the deputy said in a tired voice, "I'm here to serve you with a court order and to advise you to leave this property immediately." The sight of the uniform, the deputy, and the legal papers finally broke through her wall of self-importance. She was speechless, defeated. She shot me a look of pure, venomous hatred, got back in her car, and sped away. I saved the video from my phone. I made a copy and emailed it to Marcus. The original file was saved to a folder on my computer titled Operation Serenity Shield. Evidence. That video was the final piece I needed. It wasn't just about me anymore. I sent a copy to Tom Miller and Mrs. Gable with a simple message. The tide is turning. It's time to end this. There's an HOA annual meeting in 2 weeks. I plan to speak. I hope you will too. Their fear, which had been a low hum of anxiety, was finally burned away by the heat of pure, righteous indignation. They saw the video of the excavator, of Brenda's failed illegal gambit. They saw that she wasn't invincible. She could be beaten. My small resistance cell was now a galvanized rebellion. The last piece of the puzzle fell into my lap 5 days before the meeting. I received a discreet manila envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a short, typed note. "She's been using the HOA debit card for personal expenses." I was the treasurer. "I quit last month because I couldn't be a part of it anymore. Use this. A concerned neighbor." I plugged the drive into my computer. It contained scanned copies of the last 6 months of the HOA's bank statements. And there, highlighted in yellow by my anonymous benefactor, was the kill shot. Hundreds, no, thousands of dollars in questionable charges. Team-building lunch at a 5-star French restaurant for $600. Office supplies from a luxury handbag store. Weekly charges at Serenity Spa and Salon, coded as community maintenance. It was embezzlement. Plain, simple, and beautifully documented. I spent the next 3 days with Marcus, not just preparing my own presentation, but coordinating a full-scale assault. We prepared charts and graphs of the financial data. We prepared a motion for a vote of no confidence. We prepared a slate of interim board members, including the man who had the courage to send me the USB drive, a former accountant named David Chen. The night before the meeting, I stood in my greenhouse. The air was warm and humid, filled with the sweet, exotic scent of orchids in bloom. The spring bubbled softly beneath the floor grates. It was the picture of peace, a peace I had been forced to go to war for. The binder was on my desk inside, thicker and heavier than ever. It was no longer just a collection of documents. It was a weapon. And tomorrow, at the annual HOA meeting, I was going to deploy it. The Oak Haven Estates Community Center multi-purpose room was a symphony of beige. Beige walls, beige folding chairs, beige linoleum floor. The air was stuffy, thick with the smell of stale coffee and simmering resentment. The room was packed, far more crowded than any normal annual meeting. Word had spread. Something was going to happen. You could feel the tension like static electricity in the air. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat Brenda McGinnis and her 2 pet board members, Bob and Shirley. Brenda, radiating an aura of defiant self-importance, clutched a wooden gavel like a scepter. She wore a power suit in a particularly aggressive shade of magenta. She scanned the crowd, her gaze lingering on me for a moment with undisguised loathing before moving on. I met her stare with a placid, unreadable expression. I was in my element. This was just another briefing room. I sat in the second row, flanked by Marcus Thorne, who looked as comfortable in his tailored suit as he once did in his dress uniform. Tom Miller and Mrs. Gable sat directly behind us, their nervousness palpable but overshadowed by a newfound resolve. Scattered throughout the room were other residents I had spoken to, a quiet network of the aggrieved. Brenda banged the gavel with unnecessary force. This annual meeting of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association is now in session, she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the crowded room. She launched into a tedious recitation of the previous year's accomplishments, a list composed primarily of successful fine levies for infractions like mismatched flower pots and improperly stored recycling bins. I listened patiently. I let her have her moment. An enemy who believes they are in control is an enemy who is predictable. Finally, she arrived at the new business portion of the agenda. First item, she said, a smug smile playing on her lips, is the ongoing and serious non-compliance issue at Lot 22, which poses a significant safety and legal risk to our entire community. This was my opening. Before I could even stand, Marcus Thorne was on his feet. "Point of order, Madam President," he said, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of legal authority. Brenda glared at him. "Who are you?" "Marcus Thorne, counsel for Colonel John Sterling. Under the association's own bylaws, Article 4, Section 3, a homeowner's legal representative is permitted to speak on their behalf. My client cedes his time to me. Furthermore, I would like to make a motion to amend the agenda. I move to table the discussion of Lot 22 and instead address a matter of grave and immediate importance to every member of this association: the malfeasance and illegal conduct of the current board." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Brenda's face flushed a shade darker than her suit. "That is out of order," she shrieked, banging the gavel again. "Is it?" Marcus replied smoothly. "I believe a motion to amend the agenda is perfectly in order. Does anyone second the motion?" "I second it," Tom Miller's voice rang out from the row behind me, clear and surprisingly strong. "All in favor?" Marcus asked, turning to the crowd. A deafening roar of "Aye" filled the room. It was an explosion of pent-up frustration from dozens of residents. Brenda looked stunned, as if the peasants had suddenly produced pitchforks in the throne room. Her gavel banging was lost in the noise. "Motion carries," Marcus said with finality. He walked to the front of the room, where I had already set up a projector and a laptop. "If you'll allow me," he said, not waiting for permission, "my client has prepared a brief presentation." The first image that flashed onto the screen was the county plat map, the property lines stark and clear. "Let's begin with the facts," I said, standing and taking the remote from Marcus. My voice was calm, measured, the voice of an engineer explaining a blueprint. "This is Oak Haven Estates. And this," I used a laser pointer to circle the back acre of my lot, "is not. As you can see from the official county survey, the HOA's jurisdiction ends here." I walked the laser pointer along the dotted line. "The spring and the greenhouse President McGinnis has been harassing me about are located here, well outside that boundary." I clicked to the next slide. It was a photo of the first violation letter. Despite being provided with this map on 3 separate occasions, President McGinnis initiated a campaign of harassment, levying thousands of dollars in illegal fines. Click. A copy of the Aquifer Protection Act. She demanded I commit an illegal act by destroying a state-protected natural water source. Click. A copy of the DEP's cease and desist letter. An act so illegal it triggered an official investigation by the State Department of Environmental Protection, who issued this formal warning to the board. Brenda was on her feet, sputtering. "This is a private matter. This is slander." "Is it slander if it's true, Brenda?" I asked, my voice still level. "Is it slander that you ignored this legal warning, and 2 days later hired a demolition crew to trespass on my land and illegally destroy the spring? Click. The video I took on my phone filled the screen. The room was silent as they watched the excavator, the confrontation, the foreman's panic call, and Brenda's own furious arrival, cut short by the sheriff's deputy. The sight of her being served with a restraining order by law enforcement, on video for all to see, was devastating. The murmurs in the room grew into angry muttering. "This isn't just about me," I said, lowering my voice slightly. "This is about a pattern of abuse." I looked back at Tom Miller. "Tom?" Tom stood up, holding a garden gnome. "She fined me $400 for this," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "She threatened my family with legal action over a lawn ornament. She has made living here a nightmare of constant anxiety over trivial, made-up rules." Mrs. Gable stood next. "She ordered me to stop feeding the birds," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "She called my feeders a vermin attraction and treated me like a criminal. Those birds are all the company I have some days." One by one, 5 other residents stood up, each with their own story of petty tyranny, of absurd fines, of condescending and abusive letters signed by Brenda. It was a chorus of dissent, a tidal wave of grievance that washed over Brenda's crumbling authority. She banged the gavel, her face a grotesque mask of rage and panic. "Lies! All lies! You are all in violation. You have no respect for the rules." "Speaking of rules," Marcus said, stepping forward again, "let's talk about the rules of finance." Click. The final presentation began. On the screen, a simple pie chart appeared, created from the bank statements David Chen had provided. "This is the HOA's budget for community maintenance and supplies for the last 6 months. Click. A new slide showed a list of transactions. The $600 dinner at Le Cordon Bleu, the $850 office supply from the handbag store, the weekly $150 charges for Serenity Spa and Salon." The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. You could hear a pin drop. The residents were staring at the screen, their faces a mixture of confusion, then dawning comprehension, then pure fury. They were looking at clear, undeniable evidence of embezzlement. "Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "can you explain to the homeowners of this community how a deep tissue massage qualifies as community maintenance?" That's when she broke. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful HOA president shattered into a million pieces. She didn't just lose her temper, she imploded. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She flung the gavel, not at the table, but towards the crowd. It hit the floor with a clatter. "I have given my life to this community. I have worked tirelessly to maintain our property values. This is the thanks I get? Accusations, disrespect. I am the president. You will show me respect." She was raving, her eyes wild, spittle flying from her lips. Bob and Shirley, her loyal cronies, shrank back in their chairs, trying to make themselves invisible. The crowd was no longer muttering, they were yelling. "Thief!" someone shouted. "Resign!" screamed another. The room had turned on her completely and irrevocably. Marcus let the chaos reign for a full minute, then held up a hand. "I believe the evidence speaks for itself," he said into the momentary lull. "I would now like to call for a vote of no confidence in President Brenda McGinnis and the entire current board." "I second that," came a shout from the back. "This meeting is adjourned," Brenda screamed, but no one was listening to her. "All in favor of the immediate removal of the board, please say aye," Marcus commanded. The roar that answered was primal. It was a gut-level, thunderous aye that shook the beige room to its foundations. It was the collective voice of a community liberating itself. "All opposed?" Marcus asked into the ringing silence. Nothing. Not a single voice. Even Bob and Shirley remained silent, their faces ashen. "The motion carries unanimously," Marcus declared. "Brenda McGinnis, you are hereby removed from the HOA board, effective immediately. Please vacate the dais." For a moment she just stood there, swaying slightly, her face a canvas of disbelief and humiliation. Her power, the only thing that gave her meaning, had been stripped from her in a public forum by the very people she lorded it over. She looked at the crowd of hostile faces, at me standing there calmly, at the evidence of her crimes still glowing on the screen. With a strangled sob, she turned and fled. She didn't walk, she ran, stumbling out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The tyrant had been deposed. The coup was complete. The immediate aftermath of Brenda's spectacular implosion was a strange mix of stunned silence and giddy relief. The air in the room, once thick with tension, now felt light. People were looking at each other, blinking, as if waking from a long nightmare. A few started to clap, and soon the entire room joined in a sustained, cathartic round of applause. Marcus, ever the professional, stepped back up to the front. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice projecting easily over the subsiding applause. "While that was a necessary step, it leaves us with a power vacuum. This association requires a board to function. I would like to nominate an interim board to serve until a proper election can be held." He nominated David Chen, the former treasurer and my anonymous source, to take over as interim president. He nominated Tom Miller to be vice president. He nominated another resident, a retired school teacher known for her fairness, to be the secretary. Each nomination was met with a resounding "aye." A new, reasonable regime was installed in less than 5 minutes. Their first act as the new board was to hold an immediate vote. "The interim board's first motion," David Chen announced, his voice steady and clear, "is to formally and with prejudice void any and all outstanding fines, liens, and violations issued by the previous board under the presidency of Brenda McGinnis. All in favor?" Another roar of "aye" filled the room. It was done. The lawn gnome was free, the bird feeders were safe, and my spring was officially and forever out of their reach. The second motion was a formal, public apology to me, to the Millers, and to Mrs. Gable, on behalf of the Oak Haven HOA, for the harassment we had endured. It was a gesture of profound healing for the community. But the reckoning for Brenda was far from over. Her public humiliation was just the beginning. The following week, the new HOA board, with Marcus Thorne acting as their legal counsel, officially filed a civil lawsuit against Brenda McGinnis to recover the thousands of dollars she had embezzled. The evidence, so neatly compiled in Operation Serenity Shield, made the case airtight. Simultaneously, David Chen, in his new capacity as president, took the binder and a sworn affidavit to the local district attorney's office. The evidence of embezzlement was so clear-cut that a criminal investigation was launched within 48 hours. Brenda went from being a petty tyrant to a defendant in a criminal fraud and embezzlement case. The legal and financial pressure was immense. Faced with mounting legal bills for both the civil and criminal cases, she was forced to put her house on the market. The irony was bitter and beautiful. The woman who obsessed over maintaining property values was forced to sell her own home in disgrace to pay for her crimes against the community. Her "for sale" sign was a monument to her downfall. 6 months later, she accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of misdemeanor fraud, was sentenced to 2 years of probation, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. The civil suit was settled, with the proceeds of her house sale going to repay the community coffers she had plundered. The last I saw of Brenda McGinnis, she was driving a packed U-Haul truck out of Oak Haven Estates for the last time, no longer a queen in her castle, but in exile. The change in the neighborhood was almost immediate and utterly transformative. The atmosphere of fear and suspicion evaporated, replaced by a sense of friendliness and cooperation. People started talking to their neighbors again. Tom Miller's garden gnome was reinstated to his place of honor, and soon a few other whimsical ornaments began to appear in yards around the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable put up a fourth bird feeder in quiet defiance, and instead of a violation notice, her neighbors brought her bags of birdseed. There was a community barbecue, the first in years. People laughed and shared stories. David Chen, the new HOA president, ran the association with quiet competence and transparency. The monthly newsletter, which used to be a litany of threats and rule reminders, now announced community events and congratulated residents on their beautiful gardens. The community began to heal. In me, I found my peace. The final scene of this drama wasn't in a crowded community room or a courtroom. It was here, in my greenhouse. I'm sitting on a small, teak bench, the air thick and warm, smelling of damp earth and blooming orchids. The late afternoon sun streams through the glass panes, painting everything in shades of gold. Below me, through the metal floor grates, I can hear the gentle, constant music of the spring. It is the sound of victory. It is the sound of tranquility. The binder, Operation Serenity Shield, is now retired. It sits on a shelf in my study, a silent testament to the battle that was fought and won. It is a reminder that sometimes peace isn't a passive state. Sometimes peace is a fortress that must be meticulously designed, built, and defended. My 35 years in the Corps taught me how to build things to last. This piece, I think, is my final and most important project. The moral of the story? I suppose there are a few. It's a story about the triumph of methodical documentation over emotional tyranny. It's a story about how the law, when wielded correctly, is a shield for the just and a sword against the corrupt. But for me, sitting here among Sarah's orchids, it's simpler than that. It's about the fundamental right to be left alone. It's a story about a man who wanted a quiet life, who was pushed too far, and who, using the skills he knew best, fought to reclaim his sanctuary. And in the end, he did. The spring still bubbles, the orchids still bloom, and the quiet is absolute.